Hi. Thanks for taking the time to watch our film and listen to Michael's story. We decided to make this film easily accessible for everyone because the information it contains and the discussion it starts is just too important. We didn't want any barriers getting in the way of people watching it. We would, however, like to ask for your support. This film is completely unfunded and with no sponsorship. I paid all costs out of my own pocket, and my team and I spent over a year and a half making it. Any support you can give will go towards the making of the movie and marketing it. Even sending the price of a movie ticket would help greatly. So if this film has an impact on you, you can support us in several ways, all detailed in the description below. And of course, please don't forget to like and share this film, because together we can start talking about this. Thanks.
This is the crazy thing about my situation, you know? I did a documentary called Walking the Wisdom of the Road, and it's a documentary on walking. I walked across the country. It gives me inspiration. We have to set goals for ourselves, and my goal that I set out earlier this year is that by January of 2025, I want to walk 1 kilometer. My name is Michael Oesch. I'm currently 57 years old. I live in Waterford, Ontario, Canada. I was driving a school bus a few years ago. I really enjoyed it, semi-retirement, taking care of my house, doing my gardening, doing woodworking, making guitars. And then in June of 2022, I had COVID. It was a very mild case. It showed up on a rapid test. I wasn't that sick. It was the second time I had COVID. The first time was a bit worse, but the second time wasn't as bad. And then came the fall season, and in October, I was scheduled to take my 4th vaccine. It was an mRNA vaccine, and the following day was the Pumpkin Fest here, which is the big event in town. And we went to the fireworks festivities in town. It's a big event. We went down there and we walked around town, and then on the way coming back, I noticed that my leg started to drag. It was within 36 hours of getting the vaccine that I noticed my first neurological event. And then the following week, while driving the school bus home from my morning run, I blacked out coming down the highway. And I woke up with 3 on my wheels, 2 in the back and 1 in the front, going down the side of the highway. I straightened out, I got back on the road, but my eyes, they started quaking, like literally shaking, like almost like it was an earthquake happening. My doctor thinks it was a microstroke that happened at that time. The following week, I did get MRIs, and they realized that there were lesions on my spine. The biggest one being a 2.8 centimeter lesion on my C1, less than a 1/4 inch away from my brain.
Watch your leg. Sorry.
It's okay, I love you.
You in?
Oh, okay, I don't know how well I can move, but let's try. We found out through my neurologist it was transverse myelitis. Now, transverse myelitis is not necessarily a complete diagnosis. In some ways, it's similar to muscular sclerosis, MS, or Guillain-Barré disease. So what ends up happening is that as a result of this condition, the myelin on my spine is deteriorating. The first vaccine I had was in April of 20. That was AstraZeneca. And then later that year, I had a Pfizer vaccine. And then the same year in December, I had a Moderna vaccine. The following one I had was 10 months later in October of 2022. And that was my last vaccine.
And that was another MR.
Yes, that was another mRNA vaccine. Yeah.
So although you had COVID 2 times and 2 shots,
Yeah.
you still felt compelled to get a booster?
Yeah. You know what? I had COVID, and I was listening to what they said, get a vaccine.
It's so important to go get a vaccine, and all of them work. You know, no matter if it's AstraZeneca or Moderna or Pfizer, if you have an opportunity to get a vaccine, please get it. Because every doctor I talk to, it's going to do 2 things for you. It's going to save your life, and it's going to keep you out of the hospitals and keep you out of ICU.
So when you go to see your doctor immediately, within 36 hours or 40 hours, What's her initial reaction?
Her initial reaction was, don't take another vaccine, and we're going to get you an MRI to find out what's happened to you.
And an MRI is a complete body scan.
Complete from head to tail, from head to my butt. Well, what they believe in my condition is that the transverse myelitis was brought about as a result of the COVID vaccine activating my T cells, which reactivated a virus in my body. The other thing about it as well is that the spike proteins are staying in my body and reproducing. And that's something that they're discovering that can happen.
We have made the decision that federal public servants need to be fully vaccinated. That is something that we're also applying to everyone who gets on a plane or a train. The bottom line is, if anyone who doesn't have a legitimate medical reason for not getting fully vaccinated chooses to not get vaccinated, there will be consequences.
Okay, so this is what I'm normally like. This is what I have to get around every day. You know, the early days of my sickness, it wasn't too bad the first month, but then my battery started running low and the post-exertional malaise started happening. And the more I did in a day, the tireder I got. By April, 5 months in, I was not walking properly at all. I was dragging my feet. By the summer, 6 months in, I was laying on the couch, serious migraines, uncontrolled swelling, almost wanting to die. About 12 months in, I was hospitalized for 24 days. That was the worst. I honestly thought I was going to die. I thought I was never going to get out of the hospital. But what's happening right now that gets me most upset is the fact is that our doctors are not allowed to report about COVID vaccine injuries. My doctors are afraid to say certain things about COVID vaccine injuries because they're afraid of their medical license being pulled. My first doctor totally thought that the spike protein and what was happening was dangerous, but they wouldn't go on record to say that. They refused to write it in my reports. You know, personally, I don't have the time for that fight right now. It doesn't. If you're suffering from COVID like I am, don't waste your time on regrets. Don't waste your time fighting to try and blame someone for this. It doesn't do you any good. I only have so many hours in a day and so much energy, and I have to push it in the right direction. And I'm hoping that maybe when this is all said and done, and I'm either dead or recovered, that someone can unmask this. But you know what? It doesn't serve me anything to fight it.
As a filmmaker, I don't usually insert myself into the stories that I tell, but here we are. Let me explain. After I interviewed Michael, I came back to the shop and just backed up the footage onto a drive. I wasn't sure quite what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I was in the right, frame of mind to do something with it. It's pretty heavy. It's a pretty heavy story. It's a pretty heavy subject matter. It's emotionally charged. It's definitely politically charged. And then a couple days later, I was just scrolling through YouTube, catching up on the YouTubers that I follow. And this one particular YouTuber had an interview with another vaccine-injured person, also from Ontario. So I was like, whoa, okay, what's this? So I watched the interview, and I'm blown away because it is basically the identical story to Michael's. Gets a booster, a couple hours later, tingling, losing feeling. Before she knows it, she's struggling walking, struggling with muscles, and is diagnosed with TM. And I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. How can this be that there are two people in the same province here that within a couple of weeks, I hear their story and they've got the exact same experience? So I went back, grabbed the drive, took the footage. I didn't edit it at all. I just thought, I want this YouTuber to see this story, because I got another story here. There's another story that backs up this woman's story. And so I thought maybe it'd be in his interest to view this interview, or for her even. So I uploaded the footage, just raw, just my questions, Michael's answers, no editing, nothing, just Michael's story. And I uploaded it and I kept it unlisted. This was not going to be public or anything. I just wanted to throw it up there and send off the raw interview for like 1 or 2 people to watch. Within 10 minutes of putting it up, boom, I got an email. I've got a medical misinformation strike on my channel. They immediately deleted the video, and now I have 1 strike on my channel, which means if I get 3, they just take my channel away. Let me just read you what I got here. Our team has reviewed your content, and unfortunately, we think it violates our medical misinformation policy. Which is like just weird, because like it's just this guy's story. YouTube doesn't allow content that possesses a serious risk of harm by spreading medical misinformation about currently administered vaccines that are approved and confirmed to be safe and effective.
We branded the doctors and the experts the CBC chose that we used in our stories. We branded them as competent and trustworthy, and those who questioned and challenged the narrative were portrayed as dangerous and spreading disinformation. So I was seeing and I was hearing and I was absorbing all their stories of suffering and pain, and they were sharing them with me, and these stories weren't being told. Some of those were from the vaccine injured. Some were from people who had lost their job because of their vaccination status. So all these stories were sitting inside of me. They were left with me, and I felt the crushing burden and the weight of their truth not being given a voice. So I had witnessed in a very short time the collapse of journalism, news gathering, investigative reporting, and the way I saw it is that we were in fact pushing propaganda.
Let's see if I can get comfortable. I don't know. I know I've been diagnosed with here it is. I've been diagnosed with acute atypical transverse myelitis, meaning it's critical. I'm not walking anymore. It's atypical, meaning it's not normal like most transverse myelitis. Transverse myelitis hits you, and usually you get stricken with some paralysis, and then you recover from it. For me, it's been a 20-month descent into hell. In the past month, the only way I can walk is to actually drag my feet backwards with my walker, and for the past 4 days, I've barely been able to walk. I've fallen quite often. I've had incontinence. The brain fog comes. Chronic fatigue. The energy levels are very low. And it's the toughest battle of my life, you know? You know, at one point, 20 years ago, I walked across the country. And this is tougher than that. I guess, you know, I don't know if I'm going to die or not. I think I've come to terms with the fact that we all have to die. And this may be my time, this may not be my time. I'm going to fight for all I have, but coming to terms with that is a bit at ease. And I'm not angry. The anger was a phase of grieving. But if anything, just to kind of put it out there that, you know what, people do suffer from some sort of effect of long COVID. There's no test to prove that the spike protein is in the body, or at least in Canada. They don't do tests. There's no clinics that I can get into. There's not even a clinic for transverse myelitis in Canada that I can get into. Well, there isn't one. And so I've been left to fall through the holes of our medical system.
Yellow bag, even better.
You know, in the 18 months that I have been diagnosed with this condition, very little has been done to actually give me treatments. I was offered IVIG, which is intravenous immunoglobulin treatment, and it really hasn't done a lot, but it has helped boost my immune system. But it's not a cure. I don't know if there's a cure for this, but the fact that no one has really tried is rather disappointing. So the Vaccine Injury Support Program, which I applied to, lots of hurdles. I had to get all my paperwork in, and I finally got it all in. I don't know if they'll approve me or not. There's no doctor that's gone on record saying that what I have is a result of a vaccine injury. There's good circumstantial evidence. But, you know, I think they're kind of like an insurance company. Unless there's a smoking gun, they're going to deny me. And it's sad because I've heard of other families that have lost people who've reportedly died as a result of a vaccine. And they were denied coverage and denied support and denied any sort of claim. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Hey, Dean. It's Michael. I just wanted to call. My condition's getting worse. The spasms they're just all the time now, and I'm going to check myself into the hospital. I figured it may be something you want to record.
Here, I got him.
Perfect. We're going to turn him, and I'm going to give him a big hug from behind, and you can guide his legs up. They'll bend that way. Gotcha. Unless you think that you can grab onto me like this, and I can put you over my window. Okay.
Can you move your legs along his ankles while you pull them up?
Okay. Did it hurt you? Not at all. And over to the grass for you.
Yeah, let's get the feet in the grass. I want to sit in the grass.
I don't know if I'm ever coming home.
8th floor.
Hamilton General Hospital, day 3. Oh, I spent 24 hours getting from the emergency department through the observation, of which I spent 16 hours in spasms. It was intense. I've never felt so disconnected from my body and so in tune with the pain. They gave me hydromorphine. I think I blacked out for a few hours, which was a relief. They've been doing x-rays and CAT scans and ultrasounds, and they tried to do an MRI, but I just couldn't do it. I was spasming too much. Doctors don't know. They don't know. They're not sure if it's even transverse myelitis anymore. But they're trying to do their best. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep you informed.
Well, I've been informed I don't have long COVID. Long COVID refers to a respiratory infection. What I most likely have is a latent spike protein infection. So that's what they want to call it. And we accept that terminology now. Either way, I'm dealing with transverse myelitis and something else that's inhibiting my body from reproducing. Anyways, here from Hamilton General Hospital and making the most of it. So, there we go.
Here's a man who was healthy other than some asthma, and now he's trapped in the hospital with very little hope. And it broke my heart. You know, we imposed measures on people in this country, and I feel, you know, we are now turning our back on someone like Michael. And I know he's not alone. I've been approached by other people who have suspected that they have post-vaccine injury, and they have a very difficult time getting anyone to actually do the proper tests to tell them what this may be. All they know is that they didn't have these issues prior to taking the vaccine.
So Michael sent out an email pretty much right after we did his interview for his naturopath, who he thought would speak with me, maybe off the record, but would speak with me. But, you know, it's been months, and I still haven't been able to sit down and even have coffee with them off the record. Michael introduced me to another doctor who was helping him, and he himself thinks he has a vaccine injury because he's struggling with health issues related possibly to the vaccine. And Michael thought he might speak to me because he's just angry enough. He's so angry at everything he was forced to do during it all, and then angry because he's not allowed to talk about it. But even he is hesitant, and I have not been able to sort of have a direct conversation with him. So, okay, I get it. I get it where everybody is, because even me, I am like, man, I don't want to deal with this subject today. I don't want to deal with this. You know, so many people in my social circle think that the vaccines got us out of the pandemic and don't want to talk about it at all, don't even want to say anything about COVID. So, okay, I get it. But it's shocking because Michael is disintegrating. His condition is getting worse and worse and worse, and no one wants to talk about this. Okay, at this point, I had the title for this documentary, Why Can't We Talk About This? But I was determined to talk to somebody, anybody, about Michael's condition, the mRNA vaccines, or COVID vaccine injuries. For months, there was numerous email introductions, text conversations, off-the-record meetings, rescheduled meetings, and canceled meetings. Then finally, an occupational therapist who had assisted Michael put me in contact with Dr. Stephen Pellich, a professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of British Columbia, where he's been on faculty for over 36 years.
In addition to that, I'm one of the founders and the vice president of the Canadian Citizens Care Alliance. And that committee has been meeting for well over 3 years with about 30 other scientists and professors and healthcare professionals from across Canada. And we've reviewed the scientific literature with respect to published accounts for research related to COVID-19 and the vaccines. And we critically analyze it. And we have a lot of debate and discussion within our own group. And we've actually written articles and recently 2 books actually on COVID-19. And our objective is to make sure that the information that goes out there is scientifically sound and unbiased. The CCCA itself does not receive any funding from government nor from any companies. And so we're independent, and most of us that are doing this, all of us on our committees are volunteers. We don't actually get paid for this.
Which is very different than this gentleman, Timothy Caulfield, a law professor at the University of Alberta who has received millions of dollars, mostly from the Canadian government, to combat medical misinformation about COVID and the COVID vaccines. But we'll get to him a little bit later. When we started our Zoom conversation, I cut right to the point by asking Dr. Pellich to explain the spike protein found in the COVID-19 virus and how mRNA vaccines work to replicate that spike protein to provide protection.
The SARS-CoV-2 virus is a very simple virus. It has 28 proteins that its genome encodes, but only about 4 of those proteins actually show up in the virus particle itself. On the surface of the virus, the largest protein is the spike protein, and this protein enables the virus to attach to cells of the body so that it can get in. Being one of the largest proteins and being present on the virus itself, it's a target for the development of vaccine. And so the idea is that we use the genetic instructions, that portion of the genome of the virus that just encodes the spike protein, and we put it in these lipid nanoparticles, which then deliver that genetic information inside of cells, because these lipid nanoparticles go through cell membranes very easily. And then what happens is the cell's own machinery sees this genetic information called mRNA, messenger RNA, ribonucleic acid, and then makes that protein, just like the virus protein. But what it's doing is, after it manufactures the protein, it sends it to the surface of the cell, so it sticks out of the cell, just like it sticks out of the virus, to then stimulate an immune response.
How do I know COVID-19 vaccines are safe?
Only vaccines that are safe, effective, and of the highest quality are authorized by Health Canada.
So what often people hear is that these vaccines are safe because the mRNA is degraded and then it's gone. But for a while there, you're producing the spike protein to stimulate an immune response. The reality is that these are genetically engineered RNAs to be much more stable with a change in one of the nucleotides, that's the building blocks to make the RNA, that makes it very stable. So from one RNA molecule, you can make hundreds of molecules of the protein. And it also has an effect on the cell itself, this modified RNA, that it will also send out signals in part to recruit the immune system to attack that cell, to initiate an immune response. What most people don't understand is that when you get a shot of, let's say, a Moderna vaccine, within that shot, you have tens of trillions of lipid nanoparticles, each about the size of a virus, each with about 5 to 10 copies of the gene that actually encodes the information to make the spike protein. So it's traveling throughout your body. It goes through the blood-brain barrier. It can go down the umbilical cord into a baby. So you're really seeding these, not just in your arm, but everywhere. Most vaccines don't work this way. You know, if you get a typical vaccine in the past, which is much safer, what you'll see is that maybe 50 to a few thousand copies of a weakened strain of the living virus would be injected into a person. And because it's so weakened, it actually allows an immune response, you know, without making you sick. It can be sustainable for even decades. So, you know, we see this like with polio and other vaccines. And so when you compare that, and by the way, each virus will only have like one copy of its genes to make these foreign proteins. Again, when you're comparing that to tens of trillions of lipid nanoparticles with a single injection, it's a completely different ballgame. The immune system has never seen this before naturally from an infection. If you had that level of what we call like a viral load, you'd be so sick. And so what ends up happening is with many of these vaccines that are the COVID-19 genetic vaccines, from Pfizer or Moderna, what you find is that about 70% of the people that are actually injected do feel it. They have an adverse effect. In most cases, it's fairly mild, but what we find from the clinical studies is that about 5% of the people that were in the original phase 3 clinical trials with the Pfizer vaccine, they actually had adverse effects that were severe enough that they required to see a doctor. We do not see this with regular vaccines.
Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes.
I got into Hamilton General. They put me on some new medication, tizanidine and gabamazepine. And after about 12 days, they started to get my spasms under control. You know, they did every blood test. They did a spinal tap or a lumbar puncture. And they looked for every viral agent. And they couldn't find a viral agent inside of me. They tested me for Guillain-Barré, MS, ALS, every known condition that would explain this, and they couldn't find one. You know, and I'm trying to explain to them, it's the canary in the coal mine. They know I had the vaccine the day before this happened to me, but they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to say, and I explained it to them very eloquently, that the spike protein was probably released inside my body. It was inhibiting my ACE2 receptors, and as a result, the mitochondria in my body was not producing at a normal rate. And as a result, the myelin in my spine, which I need to move my legs to fight this demyelinating condition, it wasn't generating at the right space. And they don't understand why it's happening. I think they do. They just don't want to admit it. You know, it's even tough for them to get to say vaccine injury in a report. They don't want to say it, even though within 36 hours of me getting the vaccine, this happened to me.
We have doctors in Ontario and also in British Columbia that, you know, face disciplinary action Patrick Phillips would be the one that did this in Ontario, and his college reprimanded him for filing these reports, as is what's going on with Charles Hoff and other doctors. So there's a strong disincentive to report these injuries, that these doctors could lose their licenses. They also have to look at the sacrifice of income. We figure that the average doctor in Canada that prescribed these vaccines, they actually made a lot of money. In the United States, you can calculate, could be as much as $250,000 extra. Now, of course, we have a situation where you can get these vaccines in a pharmacy. How is this pharmacist going to know what the health history is of this patient to make the decision that, yeah, the benefit of the vaccine is greater than the potential harms? That person may have pre-existing myocarditis. That person could have a number of other ailments that could be exacerbated by the vaccine shot. And how many vaccine shots have they had? So instead of the doctors doing that consulting, explaining to the patient, informed consent means that you recognize the pros and the cons, the risks and the benefits. So, we've actually even taken that away from the doctors. So there was a lot of carrot for the doctors, and there's a big stick that's there for the doctors. So they're going to be very reluctant to say anything against these vaccines.
If a vaccine is approved by Public Health Canada and approved by Dr. Russell and her team, take that shot. Ignore NACI, ignore anti-maskers, ignore the people undermining faith and science.
One of the doctors the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario has tried to silence is Dr. Chris Shoemaker. Dr. Shoemaker has been a general practitioner for 45 years. In 2021 and 22, he even worked on the front lines of COVID, when the province recruited ex-emergency doctors to help in pre-hospital clinics. However, Dr. Shoemaker soon felt the wrath of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario when he began to voice his medical concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm Chris Allen Shoemaker. I'm a licensed physician in Ontario. We're the one group that are not allowed to speak, but I'm going to speak anyway.
They weren't too excited that doctors like myself, and there are many others, Dr. Hoff, Dr. Trozy in Canada, and many, many others, all have had licenses either interrupted or revoked, as have I had my license interrupted and revoked because I was willing to say two simple things. Ivermectin is a safe and useful medicine and should be allowed to save people's lives. And I said one other thing. I said that the vaccines have multiple harms. People should be informed that they have a risk of multiple harms. Michael had received absolutely zero concerns from his doctors or public health people that the jabs had side effects. And that, sadly, even though Pfizer itself knew in the first 8 months of it being on the market that there were horrible, horrible, horrible effects happening to people. We should have been telling to people from now on, we're going to suggest extreme caution because of effects like happened to Michael. But this extreme caution was not spoken of. And nobody liked it when a doctor was willing to stand up and say that what we should have is extreme caution. It's as obvious as the nose on my face that these 4 injections, and when he got, that's what things tend to happen. With the 3rd and the 4th jab is when a lot of people are having these neurologic conditions evolve. Michael's happened to be the one that involved him so terribly.
Well, the Ontario government should be regulating, the college. And yet I've had the same situation. I've had healthcare professionals, I've had doctors tell me the exact same thing. Bobby Ann, I'll tell you what I know, but please don't use my name. Please don't tell anyone that we had this conversation. You can't penalize doctors. You can't penalize healthcare workers with zero explanation, with zero confirmation that what you are saying is 100% correct. And yet those doctors, those healthcare professionals were not allowed to question. They were not allowed to, throw up the opposing view. And, the college has a lot to answer for. They really do.
So I reached out to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, hoping to speak with them about this issue, especially because the CPSO's current strategic plan includes a commitment to being accountable, respectful, and responsive. Unfortunately, their answer didn't at all surprise me. Good afternoon, Dean. Thank you for contacting CPSO. Unfortunately, we must decline the interview. We greatly appreciate your understanding.
The spike protein that's inside of me, maybe inside of me, I don't know, we can't measure for it, comes from the vaccine. And in a lot of cases, they are more intense, more strong. And we don't know what their potency is. There's a belief that they can start multiplying. They can start actually producing and reproducing their own DNA. I talked to a doctor, Dr. Speecher, and he's a virologist who was fired from McMaster for his beliefs and what he was saying. And he's saying that, you know, if that's the case, where your spike protein is now reproducing its own DNA, you don't got a chance. That eventually it's going to kill you.
Okay, bear with me for a moment, because this is going to get technical. In the summer of 2023, Dr. David Speaker was asked to confirm the findings of genome researcher Kevin McKernan regarding foreign plasmid DNA found in the mRNA vaccines. To do this, Dr. Speaker studied 44 vials of the COVID vaccine and found high levels of plasmid DNA in both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. This synthetic residual DNA is found in high levels as a leftover of how these vaccines were made.
They know there is DNA in the vaccines. Moderna's patent shows it. It is left over from the manufacturing process. It should have been removed, and it wasn't.
So what's the big deal? Health Canada's guideline is 10 nanograms of plasmid DNA per dose. The problem is, these guidelines are for vaccines with short pieces of naked DNA, and not for vaccines with DNA in a lipid nanoparticle.
FDA guidelines state a maximum of 200 base pair length of the DNA. We have found an average size of 214 base pairs. The largest we have found is 3,500 base pairs. It is much bigger than what should have been there.
In the House of Commons, Health Canada said on record to MP Colin Carey that this residual plasmid DNA is no big deal.
At the same time, Health Canada emailed Pfizer and asked for the size of the fragments and justification for the SV40 regulatory elements in the plasmid.
SV40 stands for simian virus 40, a polyoma virus that is found in both monkeys and humans. Like other polyoma viruses, SV40 is a DNA virus that is found to cause tumors in humans and animals, but most often persists as a latent infection. And while the full SV40 virus has not been found in the vaccines, there are SV40 promoter and enhancer nuclear localization sequences. And this is important because we know from Dr. David A. Dean's research at the University of Rochester in 1999 that if you take a DNA fragment attached to an SV40 enhancer and inject those into a cell, such as through a lipid nanoparticle and a non-dividing cell which contains an intact nuclear envelope, these DNA pieces will enter the nucleus and integrate into the genome of that cell.
It's known that injecting SV40 promoter sequences into a cell has oncogenic potential. It can knock out the cell's P53, the guardian of the genome, and make the cell cancerous.
Could this be what's causing the lesions on Michael's spine? Is there foreign residual fragmented DNA in his genome that is causing this? If these DNA fragments are integrated into Michael's genome, his own cells could be a spike factory, continuing to make spike protein, which in turn causes his own immune system to attack his own cells.
There is a connection between these vaccines and increased risk of harm. Myocarditis and pericarditis, transverse myelitis, turbocancer, we're seeing all kinds of tumors form.
In short, there are a few ways that these shots can cause harm. First, the spike protein is toxic. Second, the lipid nanoparticles on their own are toxic. And third, these shots contain foreign DNA that should not be there.
I think that it's important for everyone to understand that this massive global effort to bring vaccines within such a short time does not skip any important steps in terms of testing the vaccines for safety, effectiveness, and quality. So what has happened is normally it takes quite a number of years to develop vaccines, but because there's a massive investment from governments, international collaboration with manufacturers, these vaccines have been brought to bear in a faster time.
Safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. Oh, but by the way, we never did a single test on whether it was safe or effective. One example of that, of not being scientific, is that the original vaccines, the Pfizer-Moderna dyad of vaccines, that was tested and that was deemed safe enough, there was no DNA in it. Unfortunately, for 7 billion people, there was tons of DNA in it. They used a second system. They used a second version of the vax because it would have taken them 50 years, 50. It would have taken them 50 years to produce vaccines in the same safe method that they presented to the various health agencies. Look how safe this is. Look how there's no DNA in it. You can count on this. But then the agencies and the governments themselves cooperated with the vaccine manufacturers and said, oh, you really can't put out this product without doing it in a different way? Well, we'll just accept the safety of this first version you gave us, but go ahead, manufacture the heck out of it where there will actually be tons and tons of DNA in it as well. And that's what's happened. Fully 1/3 of the weight of what goes into everyone's shoulder is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, the hallmark of life. And because that's going into us and has the capability of going right into the nucleus of any number of our cells, it means that elements of DNA, as Dr. Speaker would have told you, elements of DNA are literally going into our spinal cord cells, the various cells that give us our immune toxicities or our immune health. The cells of various types are all being affected. It's just the wrong product. It's a deleterious product. It was always a harmful product. And Michael is simply one unfortunate victim of this deleteriously made, falsified product.
First of all, what's been proposed to people with respect to the RNA vaccines is that the technology has been in development like for 40 years, including like the lipid nanotechnology. And that's true, that the lipid nanoparticles were developed in Canada, largely through the work early on that stemmed from basically at the University of BC. And what happened is Moderna and also Pfizer both licensed the ability to use the lipid nanoparticles. You know, we've known about RNA for pretty close to 70, 80 years. The main application of the RNA in terms of being a therapeutic was more for cancer applications, and it's using what we call antisense RNA. So there's been over 20 years of research looking at antisense RNA as a therapeutic, which is, injected to hopefully get into cancer cells to block cancer proteins. We have maybe a dozen of these drugs on the market now, but they work completely differently. They're to block the production of a protein. They're not there to create the protein. Well, I think we were very desperate early on to take on this threat, and we thought that vaccination was really the main solution to the problem. Actually, as I've outlined, it probably exacerbated the problem. But we took it on. In the summer of 2020, the Canadian government had negotiations with about 7 different vaccine manufacturers. And then the approvals of those vaccines didn't actually happen until the beginning of December. So we have our government negotiating contracts to purchase these vaccines, and then having our own regulatory agency, Health Canada, go through a review of what would have been only 2 months of testing data in people, then making the decision under interim order in Canada. And what happens is in the interim order in Canada, you actually don't have to demonstrate that the product is safe, nor that it's effective. What they do is, in the way that legislation is written, you have to ascertain that the threat of, in this case, the viral infection and the consequences is greater than what you think the consequences would be of a vaccine. And we think of vaccines in the traditional sense, like I was explaining earlier, that, attenuated viruses. And then they compared that to early data where they were contemplating that the death rate of this SARS-CoV-2 virus, population-wide was, 3% or higher. And of course, as it turns out, that's completely untrue. If you're someone, for example, that's under 65, your chances are probably less than 5 in a million that you would die from it. And most of those that would die from it have comorbidities, on average about 4.
Yeah, I have no problem questioning the dangers of the vax now. I mean, I've had 3 full years of information digging and understanding how dangerous they are. So I have no problems discussing it. It was my duty to speak out to the public so that they knew that they weren't getting a free ride with these jabs, that there certainly was risk. And sadly, there was no benefit as well. There was absolutely zero benefit from the vaxes. All they did was make you more likely to get COVID, more likely to get other diseases. And that's all that they did. The Cleveland Clinic study showed with 50,000 staff at the Cleveland hospital system that the sickest staff were the people who'd had 4 and 5 vaxes, like Michael. He had 4 vaxes. The people who had 0 to 1 jab only were the healthiest of the staff. And the healthiest of all were the staff that had 0 vaxes. And so from the end of 22 onwards, I've been able to speak with comfort and with truth that the vaxes harm you in relation to COVID, making you more likely to get COVID, more likely to be in the ICU with COVID itself. And the secondary issues with neurologic things like Michael has, or turbo cancers like many people are getting, these things are the actual results of the jabs.
There are other people with vaccine injuries in Ontario, and I don't think we're being recognized as vaccine injured. There's no category vaccine injured person. There's no way to deal with it. They basically just use the word idiopathic. Idiopathic because they don't want to say the word vaccine injury, because they're afraid of what it will represent and how it will offend the corporations, the medical companies, the pharmaceutical companies that support them.
I got the first shot in April the 30th of 2021. Didn't have any symptoms, major symptoms, but it was my second shot. Immediately after that vaccine, my right leg started getting very sore. And I tried putting ice on it, and I looked down at my leg. It was bruised, roughly between 2 or 3 to 4 inches. My calf was bigger than my left. So I started automatically thinking, it has to be the vaccine that causes severe pain. I went to the New Westminster Hospital, which they kept me there under observation for 5 hours doing various tests. Dr. Brown, I think his name is, he came out and he said, "Sorry, Mr. Becker, to inform you, you have DVT, which is, a thrombosis." I went home, went to bed with a 102 degree temperature, taking blood thinners. I think it was Eliquis at that time. And then my doctor called me, and he was on the phone for about an hour looking at my charts. There was pages and pages of charts of my platelet levels being extremely low, and my blood clots were off the charts. And this was in my calf. So I did another ultrasound, and they had an intern on working me, and she got her boss, and then she moved the instrument up, and she said, "Mr. Becker, I'm sorry to tell you, your blood clots are right up to your hip. But Dean, if I get any more blood clots moving up, it's not rocket science. If they hit my organs, my heart, I can be in a lot of trouble."
I would like to share my terrible experience dealing with severe and permanent complications of my husband after COVID-19 vaccination. Last days of December 21st, he had last shot, which was Moderna, before 2 Pfizers. First week, in January 22nd, I started to notice all these symptoms. The first was like disorientation, memory loss, then, tremor appeared, then stiffness, then problem with swallowing, immobility. He was bedridden. All the doctors were astonished how fast all the symptoms developed. I was told that his compromised immune system attacked his nervous system. I'm sorry. So, my husband died after the complications. And when I asked all the doctors, would you please tell me, they were the top doctors, I asked them, how do you think from your experience, big experience, if this vaccination could be a trigger for all these complications which happen so fast? And all of them said, yes, it could be a trigger. When I asked for the little note just to have these words on the paper, I did not get.
My name is Jasmine Dea. I am a lawyer in Toronto. I practice in the area of civil litigation, primarily within the area of personal injury. So people were contacting me in the pandemic about the vaccine and adverse effects. And what I found is that they didn't really have much they could do. And when I'm telling you that they're injured and calling me, it was severe adverse effects caused by the vaccine. I learned very quickly that the drug manufacturers had immunity, so we could not sue them for the adverse effects encountered by these individuals. I also learned very quickly that the government had given themselves immunity, and so we could not sue the government either. So we really didn't have any recourse. And that was very difficult for me to advise these individuals. They'd been told to get the vaccine. They'd been told that this was for the greater good. And here they were suffering from injuries and impairments, severe adverse effects at no fault of their own and with no recourse.
We're going to make sure that people who choose not to get vaccinated don't get on a plane or a train, don't get to work in the public service, don't get by working with the provinces on vaccine certifications and mandates, don't get to go to movie theaters or gyms or restaurants and other non-essential services.
I know I had to take the vaccine. It probably saved more lives than I know, and we had to take it. We pretty well had a gun to our head. But I just happened to be one of the unfortunate ones in the small minority that had actually the spike proteins of the mRNA COVID vaccine that's supposed to mix with your cells, apparently, I'm not a scientist, to build up your immune system. They didn't help me. As a matter of fact, they hurt me.
There's a huge difference between the requirements for the childhood vaccine program that they run, and you have to provide proof or opt out in the school system. And that's the part that parents don't understand, is that there's a huge difference between that set of vaccinations and the COVID vaccine. Parents have always had the right and the opportunity to opt out of vaccinating their children against that whole list that the school board says is required. And there's a form for conscience belief and religious purposes, and many people exercise their right to opt their children out of those childhood vaccines. And I will add that there has been a drastic increase in people opting their children out of those vaccines since COVID.
We were forced to do this vaccination in spite of my warnings to all medical staff about previous life-threatening reaction of my husband. I'm sorry. On the previous pneumonia vaccine a few years before. and he had very severe reaction, life-threatening reaction. I mentioned this to all medical staff before doing this vaccination. No one paid attention on my words. So my husband died after the complications, and I'm still dealing with this injury vaccination program.
When those initial individuals contacted me, there was no program. When you look at the G7 countries, Canada was the only one that did not have such program.
Well, we've always had a vaccine injury support program.
We haven't, only in Quebec. So when these individuals came to me, I started advocating, using my voice as best I could. I wrote articles, I wrote letters to various levels of government, to health officials, doing whatever I could do to advocate for such a program and explain that these individuals have come to me and tell them my firsthand experience from what I'd seen as a lawyer, not as a medical professional, but relying on the medical evidence that they'd supplied me with. And so when the government announced that they were coming up with a program, that they had a program, I was thrilled. I was thrilled to see that, you know, maybe I had a little part. And I told all the individuals that contacted me to apply and see what happened. And I thought that was great. I'd done my job and went on my merry way. And that wasn't the end of the story, unfortunately.
The Vaccine Injury Support Program is set up no different than an insurance company. It's nutrition. They want you to stop trying, and they put every hurdle in the way.
This is the third year I am dealing with VISP program. My endless phone calls and emails are being ignored, or they contact you after many months of waiting. I've got the email that case manager now can contact people quarterly. Can you believe this? 4 times a year. And they explain this because they have a big load. They overloaded with application from many people with the hope to be helped.
The number of ailments I've seen are horrific. One individual, an older gentleman, he passed away. He had some issues soon after the vaccine, and then a couple of months later passed away. Now, he was older, and so people being the Vaccine Injury Support Program, relying upon the Medical Review Board, are saying that, well, he was older and he had other issues, so.
They basically said in this claim, I'll show you all facts that, oh, your problem isn't serious enough. I don't know how they can say that when this problem is, like I said, going to probably take me out. I told that to my doctor. He didn't deny that it wouldn't take me out. He didn't say anything. So what does that tell you?
It was denied because the impression, his condition, was not associated with the having this vaccination.
It's tough when you're fighting this battle and at the same time trying to get, retribution from the government or trying to get some contribution from the government from the Vaccine Injury Support Program.
The program was announced in December 2020. They started taking applications June 2021. And fast forward, by 2024, there have been just over 2,600 applications received. Of those, we only have about 188 as of June 1st, 2024. We have a lot that haven't even been looked at yet, or they've been processed to look at, do they meet the criteria for the program, but they haven't even gone through the Medical Review Board and had a decision made. Then we look at the figures involved. So what happened is Health Canada put out a bid and said various companies have the ability to apply. There were a set of criteria, and the criteria included, have you handled the administration of medical claims before? Do you have the ability to handle large volume? Are you credible? Are you reputable? All these wonderful criteria. And then, interestingly, the administration of the Vaccine Injury Support Program was awarded to an accounting company, a company that's known for accounting and consulting. They have now recently created a branch that handles medical reviews called Oesch, but it's an accounting company to start with, and it's a company that has done a lot of work with the government. So this was interesting, but I dug a little deeper and found that as of now, they have received $56 million from the Canadian government. Victims had received just over $14 million. And so you have to ask yourself, how is this right? How is this fair? What's happening?
October 9th. In 4 more days, it'll be 2 years since I took the COVID vaccine. And right now, it's pretty grim, my life. I mean, I'm still fighting. I'm still trying to be cheerful as I can. I don't want to kill myself. But I can't walk. My hands barely open. I can't even masturbate anymore. So what do I really have to look forward to? After my stay at Hamilton General Hospital, I was sent back to Norfolk General Hospital. They repatriated me to a community hospital which didn't have a neurologist or an MRI machine. And they left me there until that hospital decided that I had no more medical conditions. I have no medical conditions that they can deal with, yeah. And they shipped me off to long-term care. It feels like I've been put out to pasture. It feels like I've been left here to die. The problem with my situation is that because of the vaccine being the instigator of my condition, there's no way to identify spike proteins in my body. There are no tests currently available in Canada that can identify the spike protein. And as a result, the neurologists are like, oh, it's idiopathic. Well, the reason it's idiopathic is because they're idiots. I have a spike protein infection. It's not detectable by the lumbar punctures they've done, the spinal taps. All the blood tests they've done have shown up nothing to be able to identify the viral agent that caused this. You know, and they can't identify it because the Ontario government hasn't decided to actually implement the test. And there are tests that are available that can identify the spike protein. They're an antigen test that can be done, but they're rather expensive, and they need to be developed, and there needs to be a lab set up that can do it.
It's not right. I mean, Michael is being denied tests, and there are treatments that Michael believes may help him. And yet the Ontario health system allows him to lay in bed with absolutely no recourse. It's wrong. If Michael believes that there's a treatment that might help him, if there is actually data and there's research out there that these tests, that these procedures might help him, then my goodness, why aren't we doing them?
So are the vaccines safe and effective?
No. These vaccines are really not safe, and they're not effective, because when you have a vaccine, you're giving it to healthy people. You're protecting them against future infection such that they will not get that sick, certainly not sick enough that they're going to require hospitalization or could die. The reality is that these vaccines are fleeting in the immune protection they provide. They also, at the same time, have this risk, because you're attacking your own cells, of causing damage and exacerbating pre-existing conditions.
The biggest thing you have to know in immunology is, largely speaking, don't do anything. Don't put jabs into people that will wreck their immune system. That is what the mRNA vax is and does. It has wrecked the immune systems. The body attacks non-self. Any vaccine is by definition non-self. And especially this mRNA that waves a flag telling the whole body as it's inflaming your heart. This is spike that is not of you. What the body does is it attacks the tissues, the cells of the heart or of the kidney or of the brain stem, in Michael's case, and of C1 and C2 just below the brain stem. And Michael's own healthy immune system went after his previously absolutely normal spinal tissues. And that is what has robbed Michael Oesch.
The Health Canada and government messaging around these vaccines has been so wrong. They are anything but safe and effective. But they say the vaccine stays at the site of injection. The vaccine is not bioengineered modified mRNA. The genetic material will not enter the nucleus. The DNA is fragmented and not bioactive. The vaccines are not associated with increasing cancer. These are vaccines and not gene therapy. None of that is true.
All I know, Dean, right now is I'm a broken man. I'm broken, but I'm not defeated.
Yeah.
You know, I'm bent, but I'm not going to break. So for me, I just want to tell people out there that there are people out there like me, and it should be their choice. I had no choice at the time. I had to take the vaccine, or I wouldn't be able to make any money. I'm not saying everything's okay. I still think people are still getting COVID. They're minor cases. So I'm just trying to say is that it's not all about me, but it's about people like me, you know, and I know they can't fix me. There's nothing that anybody, any experts or doctors I've seen, they say they can't fix me. All they can do is control my problem. And that's the ace of spades that was dealt to me, and I just gotta play it.
I'm terrified that we're never going to get the proper answers. We're never going to, for the little guy who is now questioning it. And I think that despite how anyone felt about COVID-19, despite how they felt about the way it was handled, despite how anyone felt about vaccines, the taxpayer deserves to know the truth. They deserve to know the answers to the questions that are being asked of me. Did things work? Were vaccines necessary? Did we go about this the right way? Those are all very simple questions that we all deserve an answer to, and it should be an honest answer. If the government came out and said, look, you know what, we had no idea what we were dealing with, we dealt with it this way because we didn't know better, there might be some empathy, there might be some sympathy. But when they don't answer the question, when they dodge and they use messaging that people are now seeing through, it's difficult to have any empathy or sympathy for them.
We need an overhaul of the system. I believe the next avenue to pursue is judicial review. I'm going to be facing an uphill battle because I'm going to have to take this to court not knowing exactly what to say because no one's done this before. And I'm going to have to convince a judge to say that the federal program is not working. And I don't know if I'm going to get that answer or not.
There are just maybe 200 from 1,000. Unfortunately, maybe people don't know about this. They're not aware about the numbers. Okay? This is why they don't want to speak out. And this is very brave people who decided to write down the books and to speak out. They're very brave.
I'm hoping that where we go from here is that first people become aware of these problems, that politicians, recognize this as well. We're already seeing this in our population. I mean, the fact of the matter is the adoption of these booster shots has just plummeted. And so the public knows it. In many other countries, in Europe, for example, they don't recommend these vaccines anymore for children. They don't recommend for even adults. And in some places, they won't even pay for it. In North America, we just do not seem to be getting the message.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, hopefully there's some material there that you might be able to use.
I might maybe get 30 seconds out of it.
Yeah, that's what I figured. That's the nature. And then that's what you should be doing. You should be talking to different people with totally different opinions. And somehow, when you see what they have to say, you kind of start to get a sense of, the truth is somewhere presumably in between. I think you'll find it's a lot on my side because I've done so much work. I mean, I have nothing to profit from this. But what I am very concerned about, and this is what scientists should be doing, right? We're looking for the truth. We want to know what's going on. We don't want to be going down dogma that actually is false. We work hard to fight against dogma and seek truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say I should get a varied voices of opinion, which is, yes, as a filmmaker, that's my number one thing. But this is probably the one project where it's the most difficult. Yeah.
Interview Timothy Caulfield. Timothy Caulfield is a lawyer, and then he's a professor. He has no actual training in health sciences at all, or even science, from what I can tell. He will not actually debate anybody who has a different opinion from him, and his opinion is completely informed by Health Canada. But he has grant funding to basically go out there and call people like myself purveyors of misinformation.
See, I told you we'd come back to Timothy Caulfield. It wasn't difficult to find Mr. Caulfield's stance on the COVID vaccination. He's been a very vocal proponent of them. However, as I read through his articles, I noticed there was a lack of scientific data or research in his writings, and he always tied the issue to politics. For example, he believes a person's vaccine status is based mostly on political ideology, or that the number of COVID deaths can be directly related to the political ideology of a state or province. And as I mentioned earlier in this film, Mr. Caulfield received over $3 million in funding from the Canadian government to disprove the following COVID treatments. I'm using quotes here because I'd never heard of these treatments before. Drinking bleach, drinking garlic soup, drinking silver, snorting cocaine, and drinking cow urine. So as you can imagine, I was very eager to speak with Mr. Caulfield, and I really wanted to hear everything he had to say on the topic of mRNA vaccines. And so I sent him a letter where I explained that I was doing a documentary on a local person in my town with a vaccination injury, and that many of the experts, scientists, and doctors that I spoke with actually recommended I reach out to Mr. Caulfield and to speak to him. And so I was really hoping that I would hear from him. So let me just read you his response, which would be, I didn't get one. And so I followed up with his assistant and wrote the same thing and explained further about the documentary, and she said nothing. So, I mean, I tried. I did really try. So, want to give me an update?
Well, it's 2 years, 3.5 months since my vaccine. And I've ended up in long-term care. It's not the place I want to be, but it's the only place for me. I can't move my toes anymore. My hands are going. I can't straighten my fingers at all. And I'm short on breath. My breath is starting to go. I wish a rehab was available for me, but this is long-term care. The only rehab they have is for people who are 80, and that is simple rehab. This neurodegenerative order is progressing. My neurologist basically says, Michael, I've never seen anything like this before. He basically defined it as a idiopathic neurological degenerative disorder, which basically means we don't know what the fuck is happening to you. And as a result, I've been left in limbo. It's hard to fight. Fighting the vaccine infection and the system. I mean, I can't fight the system anymore. I don't have the energy to. They've ghosted me. They said I don't have a condition. They're not acknowledging it.
So, update from the Vaccine Injury Support Program?
You know, I haven't heard anything from the Vaccine Injury Support Program. We've emailed them, and they're like, well, we're still looking at your records. We're still waiting on stuff from the hospital. You know, it's been it'll be 2 years in May since I applied, and we're no closer. I honestly suspect that I will be denied. You know, I can't fight that. Maybe after I'm dead, someone will worry about that. But I'm fighting for my life. That's the only fight that matters with me right now. I was hoping by January 2025 I could walk again. I was hoping that this wasn't a neurodegenerative disorder. But it is. I don't know if I'll ever walk again. A friend of mine came by just before New Year's, and he asked me, what, if anything, do I want? I said I wanted to stand again. So he helped me sit up on the side of the bed. We boosted the bed up, and then I stood in my walker. We took a few pictures of me standing. I can't lift my feet off the ground. I can't move my ankles. I can't bend my toes. But I stood up again. That's about as close as I'll get to walking, unless a miracle happens.
So there is no medical plan for you?
Right now, there's no medical plan test for me. There's no plan going forward. There's nothing for me, except for sit here and wait to die. The thing I regret is the places I'll never get to go. Never be able to hold my granddaughter again. Never be able to make love to my wife. You know, never be able to, all those things I used to take for granted that are now stripped from me. And it's hard to let go of the life you had to live inside of this new box that I have. And even though I'm grateful I'm alive, I have to learn to be grateful for less. And it's, I'm not gonna lie. There are times I think I'd rather be dead. There are times where I cry, thinking about what is left in my life. But yet I persevere.